Hi, I'm U.S. Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. It's my honor to join you for this conversation between two of the most recognizable and most capable advocates on behalf of refugees. First, we're joined by Angelina Jolie, who is not just a talented and widely recognized actress and director, but also has served for many years as Special Envoy to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. We're also joined by Hamdi Ulukaya, who's the founder and CEO of Chobani yogurt, someone who grew up enjoying traditional Kurdish yogurt and has brought it to the United States and has now been a forceful advocate for the role of the private sector in addressing humanitarian crises and in particular, welcoming and including refugees in the United States. Thank you both for being a part of this conversation today.
Thank you for having us.
Let me also thank Cindy McCain, the McCain Institute, and everyone who helps make the Sedona Forum happen year in and year out. All three of us knew and were inspired by Senator John McCain. It was my honor and joy to know him here in the Senate, to travel with him, and we hope to continue this conversation today in his spirit of leadership. If I might, Angelina, would you say that the situation for refugees globally has changed for the better or the worse in the 20 years that you've been connected with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and have served as a special envoy?
Sadly, it's worse. It's much worse. If you just look at the numbers, we have doubled in the last decade, and are most likely going to double, if not sadly much more than that, especially if we don't address the climate crisis in the decade to come. It's not just that the numbers are growing; it's just that it seems that our inability to address the root causes, our inability to to meet the needs of the people during displacement and work with them to then not just survive this displacement, but to use this on average 18 years of displacement and then return to their countries and help stabilize and rebuild their countries. So I think we're failing on in many ways. And I don't think there's one crisis that's more than, or one appeal that's more than 10% funded. We have situations that are 2% funded. And what that really means in the field is people who are not going to survive. And so it's not sustainable. And it's a very, very, it's an explosive situation that if we don't get a handle on it is only going to grow and become much worse.
So you wrote an editorial with Senator McCain on the circumstances of the Rohingya, the genocide, the very horrific actions against the Rohingya. That ran in the New York Times in 2018. It was one of the last editorials that our friend Senator McCain published. How do you view the ongoing crisis regarding the Rohingya 3 years later? And if you were still with us today, which of the crises around the world, and they are many, and they are worsening, that you referenced, which of the current crises do you think our friend and senator would be charging into tackling today?
Oh, I imagine he'd be on fire with many. I think, above all, from what I felt from him was he felt this responsibility of what is American leadership internationally and where do we stand? What is the principle, that we will stand on? What lines will we not cross and what will we fight for? And I felt that strongly in working with him in 2018 about the Rohingya crisis and the genocide and talking about what had to be done, who had to be held accountable, how seriously it must be taken to address what had happened to these people, what had been happening for very long times. I met Rohingya families in India decades ago. This is not a new situation. And I sadly, I reread what we had worked on together before this, and you read this and you see we were kind of begging for there to be a response. It is almost impossible not to connect the spillover of inaction and people being held accountable for horrible, horrible crimes isn't part of, if not in large part, why it is as bad as it is today. And we see that repeatedly. When we do not respond, when there is a lack of accountability, when we let lines be crossed and we don't step forward, we are sending a message that we don't take it seriously, we won't stand against it, we're empowering abusers. So I think he would be angry.
My first trip with Senator McCain involved stopping in Afghanistan, among several other countries. All of the countries we went to had some refugee crisis or issue of some kind. Our last visit was to Jordan to visit a refugee camp of Syrians. Our first visit on that trip was to Afghanistan. You've had a particular heart for these countries. Tell me how you see the situation that's evolving in both Syria and Afghanistan.
Oh, well, I'll speak on Afghanistan because it's quite fresh in my mind. I was on the 2 weeks before 9/11, I was on the border of Afghanistan in Quetta, Pakistan. And I was there because I looked at these maps with my UN work and I said, where are the most displaced people in the world and why? And without knowing much and without being a senator, I landed myself there because that's where the displacement was. And at the time there had been decades after the one conflict in Afghanistan, and there'd been 7 years of Taliban, and at the time they were closing camps. They were pushing people back from Pakistan into Afghanistan while the Taliban was still being as brutal as they were being. The point is, I have watched that moment. I have watched 9/11. I have watched the people forcefully returned to nothing. I have followed people back into Afghanistan and seen them. I've seen so many promises made and broken. I have met with troops, American troops, who've given their limbs and lives to believe in the cause of helping the Afghan people, most of all the women and girls. And I think we are in a moment where we are in grave danger of abandoning those promises. That's not to say about pulling out or not, or whether there should be troops. It's about our continued commitment to what we went in there for and what we rallied our nation behind, which was the defense of these innocent women and children. And if we are simply going to walk away, we are going to be seeing another crisis, and another refugee crisis, another humanitarian crisis. So we have to, because we already see a lack of protection for these women. We're already seeing executions of female, of women who are standing up for their rights and leaders in the country, executions. So we have to be very, very careful in this moment so we don't repeat the sins of the past, which we often do in that country.
I have no doubt that if John were here, that he would be a forceful voice for us to